I'd like to welcome today's speakers, Dr. Carrie Priest, Associate Professor, Saley School of Leadership Studies and Leadership Communication, and Nicola Saunders, doctoral student in Leadership Communication. Thank you, Dr. Priest, for letting the Graduate Student Council sponsor today's event. With that, I will hand it over to Ms. Nicola.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for having us today. One thing, I'm in my second year in the Leadership Communication doctoral program. And Dr. Priest has started the recording. So we're recording just so that folks who couldn't join us today are able to, watch and still be able to earn that certificate credit if they need to. So we want to thank the Graduate Student Council for hosting us. And we'd like, I'm going to let Dr. Priest introduce herself first, but then we'd like everyone to tell us who they are. So as well.
Yeah, thank you again for joining us. Today, we are so excited to be here and sharing this presentation that's really a outgrowth of our own journeys and the work that we've been doing together in learning and navigating the complexity of being part of a graduate studies work. And I also want to acknowledge that the resources that we're using today are adapted from the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. And so we've shared some references at the end if that's something that's interesting to you. So yeah, so as you come in, and we invite you to turn your camera on if you feel comfortable doing so. You may want to put it on and off at different times, but if you would just in the chat, go ahead and share your name, your program, and just a quick note about what's bringing you here today. What interests do you have? What are you curious about? What brings you here? And we'll give you a minute to do so. And while you're doing that, if you haven't got the handout already, I will put that back in the chat again. You can either try to access it from the Google Drive, or I'll put a PDF version that you can just follow along with or save for later if you would like to go back and look at it. So again, just in the chat really quick, what's your name, program, maybe where you're zooming from, if you're from not from Manhattan, like where are you zooming in from today? Welcome everyone. Cynthia and Jack, hi. Avery, welcome. Cheryl and I have been in multiple trainings together and classes together. Good to see you again. And as we just continue to kind of introduce ourselves via Zoom, we get a sense of our community here and the what we each bring into this space and what our interests are. We come with, you may be just coming because you're like, well, I want to get the professional development certificate, and this was one of the last ones on the list. So if that's the case, I hope we'll have a great experience for you today. As we begin, we want to start by just centering ourselves a bit and acknowledging that as we enter into work around change, that we are living and working in difficult times. So we start with just an acknowledgement of the difficult times we experience in our semester, in the world. We hold space and recognize that many of us are hurting, the people we care about are experiencing challenges and pain and difficulty. And so we hold these challenges in our thoughts, and we pause and we remember and recognize the patterns of challenge and loss that we see around us. We also acknowledge that from challenge comes change. And so we turn our minds towards possibility and hope, that in our time together, we can step into hope and see patterns for possibility and for growth, because in that hope, we can create a better world. So, so some aspirations for this session that we have today. So an overview of what we will be doing. So we are going to engage in a narrative process to identify opportunity and possibility in the midst of complexity. You will develop a change narrative, which we are using as a tool to create a story that guides present actions in pursuit of future personal and professional goals. I just want to do check-in. Everyone can see my screen okay? Sometimes on my screen, I can't always tell what's happening. So, okay, perfect. We invite you into a process of inquiry. So certainly as scholars and researchers and graduate students, you're no strangers to inquiry, discovery, co-creation, but we invite you today into a process of self-inquiry in community. So we're holding space for inquiry requires us to turn our judgments into curiosity, disagreements into shared exploration, defensiveness into self-reflection, and assumptions into questions. And as we hold this space of inquiry in community, we invite you also to these commitments of community. We invite you to stay curious and be present. Again, as you're able to open up your videos and microphones, we welcome that. To listen with respect and appreciate others' journeys and perspectives. Stay open to this process. It may require some vulnerability and a little bit of uncertainty even as we're going through, but to embrace courage over comfort and expect and accept non-closure. You're not going to leave with a really neat story here. You're going to leave with a draft of your change narrative, and just know that this is just the beginning of a process. So if that feels okay to everyone, you can give a thumbs up, you can nod your head, you can do a other kind of emoji or something like that. Okay, thank you so much. So when we talk about a complex change narrative, let's start with talking a little bit about complexity, just a really quick overview of what do we mean by complexities. We live and work in complex adaptive systems. Our families, our work, our spiritual lives, the activities we're a part of are complex. And so what makes them complex? The nature of complex systems is that they are open, highly diverse, and interconnected. So when we say the system is open, it means that there's many forces at play, both inside and outside the system, that are acting on each other and that are acting on us. We come into this room together. This is not a closed system, right? Like we have lots of other things happening all around us, and we acknowledge that that is an open system. Highly diverse means that there are many differences. We know that many differences add incredible value. It also increases complexity. And so when we're trying to navigate complexity, we try to notice differences and we try to focus in on what differences make a difference. Choosing what matters most in the system and focusing there can help us to navigate the many differences that exist. And finally, interconnectedness. We recognize and operate from an assumption that we are interdependent, that when we think about our challenges, it's really impossible to narrow it down to one root cause. We recognize that our situation is connected to the past, present, and the future, and that our interconnectedness plays out in our choices, that there's no right answers. There's no right next step. There's only a next wise action or a next wise choice. So in the midst of all of what can feel like chaos, right, we try to find patterns and think about what's our next wise action. So again, the nature of complex change is that patterns are constantly changing as a result of conditions changing. New patterns are always emerging, and the goal is to focus present forward, acknowledging the past. We're looking for what's the best fit in the moment. So when we think about trying to navigate complexity, we're thinking about where do we find internal and external coherence? How do we manage tensions? And how do we find optimal connections, again, that help us make the next wise choice and make progress in the systems we're a part of. So to be able to do that, we're trying to see patterns clearly, make meaning, and share our learning and insights, and build adaptive capacity. What we mean by adaptive capacity is essentially resilience in the face of complexity. We need to be curious and sensitive to be able to see what's around us and act. We need to be responsive and connected, right? And so these three things are what we mean by building our adaptive capacity. We're trying to stay curious, be responsive, and focus on connection. And so I'm going to have Mikola share a little bit about how narrative becomes a tool to help us build that adaptive capacity.
All right, just making sure I'm not back on mute. When you think of the term narrative, what comes to mind? Some of you mentioned it as one of the things that drew you to the session today in the chat, but if you could throw in the chat really quickly, what comes to mind when you think of narrative? All right, so I'm going to play right off these first two people who said story. So in my first career life, I was a newspaper reporter. And in that environment, constantly you're thinking about how can you make this thing that we're determining is newsworthy, how can we make it resonate with people? And the thing that makes it resonate is that story, right? Like if you can get the information that you need from that personal point of view, how is it affecting something, right? So if we think about that in terms of the story that you want to tell of yourself, that's what today is really for. And that's why I think part of why I get really excited about this, because working in that environment where you're turning facts into things that feel like stories is very different than deciding, like we're going to do today, what you want your own story to be. And I think that the power of using narrative in this kind of way is that it lets you think differently about the past, present, and future that we're really working through. And we'll get into some of these things a little more deeply as we go today, but if you think too about your own identity as a scholar, as a professional, whether it's in academic environments or some other kind of environment, it's really going to, who you are and how others see you is constructed through the stories that you tell about yourself, the stories that others tell about you, and sort of that, the dialogue of those stories and how they work together. And so today, narrative approaches, they really give us a unique opportunity to examine and really get at that meaning of our own personal experiences and how they sort of push us and change us as we go. And they can reveal themes and discourses that can inform the design of intentional practices and development experiences. So to me, that feels like how you can almost, if you know where you're trying to go, you can almost kind of reverse engineer what you need to be thinking that's going to help you so that that discourse that you're sharing really moves you in the direction you want to be going. And until I learned about more of this, I didn't really understand that was really possible, I think. So that's part of what makes this feel exciting to me. And just as a reminder too, so community is created when individuals are willing to share their personal stories of experience, choices, and lessons that they've learned. As we hear and consider one another's unique stories, we begin to find points of connection and common purpose. We discover the urgent challenges we share and the choices that we have to make, and the hope to which we can aspire. So when we ask you to share later on, please keep that in mind when you're sharing with your partner too. And I'll talk just a little more about the change narrative kind of process that we're going to walk through today. It's in the context, the change narrative is a story about what we want, who we are, and how we live. The patterns that we create through our story process will help shape patterns and discourse and action and move toward adaptable life patterns. We're going to be using a guiding inquiry framework to create our narrative.
Thanks. So, okay, so if you haven't downloaded the handout, you might want to do that now. You can, again, use that as a guide, or if you just have some paper and you want to draw 3 circles on it, that's also perfectly acceptable, or just you're going to want to take notes while you're working through this, because we're writing a story today. We're writing a draft of our story. And the first thing we're going to talk about is what's at the center of that story. The sweet spot that we're asking ourselves, what do we want? When we think about change, our inquiry starts with naming what we want in our life. This is the pattern that we're trying to change. So you are likely coming in today with an issue or a challenge or something on your mind that you would like to change. This could be a big challenge, or it could be a really small challenge. So for example, when I went through this for the first time, I was coming off of my sabbatical, coming back into kind of full-time faculty work. And I was thinking a lot about my research agenda and how to become a more productive and purposeful scholar. I've experienced success, but I just recently have been feeling like I have a hard time kind of keeping up with things. I'm working towards always like to the last minute. That's something that I don't like about my own work patterns and when I'm trying to collaborate. So that was the thing I was kind of focusing in on, like, what is it that I want to change? And I want to be a purposeful and productive scholar practitioner. That's what's at my sweet spot. Nicola, what's yours?
Sure. So for me, I've been working through a lot of tension, just trying to balance school with the rest of my life and whether I'm able to contribute now to this work or if I'm supposed to sort of wait until I'm finished with my program. So what I really came up with is aligning my activities and my goals.
And so some other examples are maybe you're looking for some simplicity and congruence in your home and work life. You're aspiring to a healthy life that reflects your core values, a more clear and purposeful research agenda, whatever that is, and it's personal to you. But let's just take a few minutes together, 3 or 4 minutes, and jot down, starting with a few words that describe the essence of what you want, the change you're hoping to achieve. And then see if you can put that into a sentence or 2. So we're going to try to get to where we just have a quick sentence about that. And if you're like me, you probably overthink it. So we're just brainstorming right now. So just write it down. I'm gonna pause and give us a couple minutes to do that. Okay, that was right about 2 minutes, which I know wasn't a lot of time, but hopefully you got a chance to jot a few things down. Just give me a signal. Does everyone have, at least one sentence, a general sentence written down of area of focus, or do you need like 1 more minute? I see some hands. Okay, I'm going to do something that might seem a little strange, but if you would open up your microphones, and if you're able to open up your camera for just a minute, I invite you to do so. And we are going to say out loud all together what we want. Okay, so there's a lot of power, right, in the collective. And sometimes it can feel vulnerable just to share it individually. So on the count of 3, we're going to say, I want, and then everyone's just going to say it together, right? And if you're still uncomfortable doing that, you can say it with your microphone off. That's okay. Or you can put it in the chat, but we're just going to experiment with it. How does it feel to just say out loud that statement, I want? Okay, everyone ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
I want
Live
health
fully and work to
certificate
conserve our
to daily habits.
Lives, impact
Best
people's
for me
lives,
without worrying about
and
what other people think.
expand my organization.
All right, thank you so much. Mikola's going to take us to the next step.
All right. Thank you all for doing that. I think that's like Carrie said, I think that's there's a lot of power in that. So now the next step is to think about your identity. Who is it that lives where you want to be? If we think about humans use identity to organize actions, beliefs, give meaning to our lives, right? And we use identity here in the sense that who do we want to be? Where do we want to grow? How do we see ourselves in relation to others, our work? Any other aspect that you identified in your sentence? Identify the kind of person who would inhabit or embody the sweet spot that you just identified. So some examples: I am organized and action-oriented. I am aware of my own needs. I am prepared. I am knowledgeable. For me, this is something that I keep coming back to, even in just a few days this week, in different things that have surfaced in class. I added one yesterday. I am driven by equity. I took a stand in a class discussion yesterday that really hit me pretty hard, as like, that's an I am thing now. And that's the kind of it relates to the work I want to do. It relates to some of the stuff we'll talk about later in the session about the things that are going to continue to guide me. So think about what does that sweet spot wish that you just put out there, what does it take action oriented wise to get to that place? And write some of those down for yourself as well. And you can, if you feel comfortable, you can share those in the chat, but you can keep them to yourself if you like at this point too.
I'm really loving all of these that you're putting in the chat. I was like, ooh, I want to be that too. This is part of the reason why I struggle with focus, which is the next one, right? Like, I love this. Great. And so again, we're going through this pretty quickly, but you'll have more time to continue to reflect on this on a little bit later and on your own. So after we think about, who will I be? Who am I in this future space, right? That I can be. The next step is
Here, Dr. Priest, I got to stop you. I think the recording is still paused.
Oh, did I pause it? Okay. Is it back?
I think so. Maybe I read it wrong. I apologize.
That's okay.
It looks right now.
It looks right. Okay, great. This is the joys of Zoom. Thank you for checking though. So as we're coming in we're moving from identity to focus. So in this area, we're asking, what is most important? What do you need to focus on in the space of what you want? So what's most important is often revealed as we think about the issues and challenges and questions that feel most urgent or conflictual related to that sweet spot where we want to be. Tensions can actually reveal important data. And in complex systems, points of tension have the most potential for transformative change. It gives us clues as to where change can really happen. So do you need to focus on things that are more material or emotional or relational or even conceptual? So for example, if I'm thinking about how do I be a purposeful and productive scholar, there's certain concepts that I really want to focus on related to practice and systems and collective leadership. I'm also recognizing that there's tensions between like my time teaching and my time in research. So I need to really focus on how I'm managing my time. I also feel a tension between confidence and imposter syndrome. So I know that I need to kind of focus on like how I continue to support myself and find communities to work with around that. There's differences in types of work that I need to focus on. So again, what is it for you? What do you need to focus on related to your sweet spot? Nicola, what did you share when in this area, or what did you write down?
So for me, the focus is really the purpose. And I'm trying to I'm trying to get so much clarity right now on sort of what the right questions for research are going to be. And I keep coming back to once I figure out and can really focus on that purpose, that other stuff is going to surface because it's focused in the right place.
Great. So again, let's take a couple minutes in for you thinking about what is most important and where do you want to put your focus related to that sweet spot. Okay, before we move on to connections, would anyone be willing to open up their mic and share an example of something that they're trying to focus on or that they want to focus on? Or add something to the chat? Thanks, Megan. Focusing on action, consistency. Thanks, Jack, on loving your true self, getting better grades, keeping up with assignments. Yeah, really, really great examples across a whole range of dimensions, right? That have to do with where we are, with the challenge that we are experiencing. Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, overcoming that imposter syndrome is something, yeah, that a lot of us can relate to. Great, thank you so much. Let's move on then to who do we need in our space to accomplish these things?
So how do we need to connect? We're not alone in our stories, right? Our lives are shaped through our interactions with others, and we shape our realities through those connections and how we choose to engage. What are ways of connecting and engaging with others that get you to keep that focus on your sweet spot? Think about personal relationships, work relationships, personal behavior patterns you might have as you're thinking about that. Some examples, for me, I decided, I felt like I wasn't doing this necessarily, but in order to make this change, I decided I need to be connecting and contribution. I need to be willing to share right now. So I connect in contribution and empathy. Carrie, would you like to share yours?
Yeah, I have a few. I said I connect in curiosity and responsiveness. And then I'm still thinking through a few more, even as we're talking here, of what particular like patterns of connection that I need to foster as well. So yeah, let's take a few minutes and think through this. Yeah.
And just as you're writing your notes, I'll share just a few more examples. It could be that you connect through listening, through courageous conversations, through speaking to loss. Those are some other ways.
Can I just ask for clarification?
Sure.
The connection is me with my sweet spot, or connecting my community with my sweet spot, or all of the above?
Nicola, do you want to respond, and then I can add something?
Sure. I mean, I think for the way I understand it, I think it would depend. It could be all of the above, and it would be, the lens would be depending on what the change is that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And, you know, when you think about, again, like the process of like, the ways that you want to engage or connect across people, I guess I'm having a little trouble, maybe even now that I've started sharing that, like understanding the context of your question. Would you be willing to share like what your sweet spot is? And then maybe the rest of us can kind of help too.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
So my sweet spot that I've decided I have a lot of sweet spots, but the one that I chose to focus on is productive writing practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so got identity pieces, got focus, but now that like, I'm like, I really just need to connect with my either work or connect with my, I keep joking that I strap myself to my desk chair and, you know, tie myself to my computer and make myself do that. And that's not the connection I want with my writing process. It hasn't always been that way, but that's where I'm at right now. And I don't like it. And I'm hoping to get back to I'm hoping to, I guess, reestablish connection, but I guess and maybe this is just because I see my writing as such an independent process that I don't know. I don't know if I've given enough clarity.
Yeah. And if others have insight into this, you know, I can also relate to what you're saying, and it makes me think about, to get into a productive zone of writing, I need to connect, like I need to create space in some ways. And I guess I'm thinking about, like, I need to connect with my spaces or even and I need to connect like with like a openness or maybe even with like self-compassion sometimes when I feel stuck. I don't know, how are others kind of thinking about that? Like, what are the ways that we need to connect either with ourselves or with different kinds of engagement? Maybe that's another way of thinking about it. What are some of the ways of engaging that would be helpful?
I can relate, Anne, because I'm kind of in a similar situation. The sweet spot I want to get to is improved writing practices, better, more productive, more impactful writing. And the areas I need to focus on are overcoming imposter syndrome and perfectionism that are barriers to my writing. I feel like I need to connect through vulnerability, courage, grace, with myself. I have trouble even sending drafts to my advisor because I feel like it's not ready. I want to do more and get it ready before I send it to her. And she keeps encouraging me to just send me what you have and send it, send drafts. And I just have trouble sending it until I feel like it's ready. And that's not a productive way to write and get feedback. And so I'm really struggling with that. So I need to connect through vulnerability and courage. And what was the word you used, Carrie?
Self-compassion.
Self-compassion. Yes, that. Thank you.
Yeah. And is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess I've kind of, I'm also sitting here thinking of what I tell my students to do, which is to separate my editor from my writer, because my editor is, she mean. And my poor little writer's feeling a little beat up these days. So
I love that. Thank you. That's really insightful, right? That's it's like actually a disconnection, right? That you need to make in some way between those two kind of personas. I saw Cynthia had a question. Is this for the group to kind of think about a little bit more, Cynthia? What came up for you about, so you're trying to kind of change your organizational style. You mean like kind of how you are organized, or how your organization functions?
Kind of both. I think like I just need more like help with organizing my space and making sure like I'm more productive in that space with my homework and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts about connections? How do others like engage connections in these areas? Yeah, this is a tough one for the group, maybe we're all struggling a little bit with that. What kind of patterns are you currently using? Or how do you, what kind of patterns are you currently using?
So I have a planner, and like, so I'm organized in that way, but like, I just feel like I'm not organized in other aspects of my life. So I just want to be more like organized in general, I guess, is my sweet spot.
Yeah, so maybe the first step is to think about, how do I connect with like resources or tools, right? That could help me be more organized. How do I connect? It seems like you're kind of like trying to connect with clarity. So again, that's a little more abstract, but it's like you're looking for, like, I want to connect with my work in a way that where I feel kind of like clear and purposeful and ordered, maybe, is a way of thinking about that. And kind of looking for what kind of resources might help with that. So good questions. There's no rights or wrongs here. It's all kind of experimental. That's why we call it like navigating, right? The tensions, because they're complicated. And so these are giving us some clues as to the kinds of patterns that could help us. Great. So let's move then to a little bit more pattern making or pattern spotting. So we've talked a little, and I think this might actually help us parse out some of the questions that are coming up for us. So we've talked a bit about identity and focus and connections. And as you look across these areas, where do you find connections between them? So for example, if I was to look at my identity and focus and think about like a pattern for action and kind of and state it as like an action. For me, my pattern of action is to align my project choices with my passion and purpose. Between my focus and my connections, I have, between my identity and connections, I said, engage my research assistants in a new way. And I also said, develop a project management system that allows for timely progress and prioritization. So again, kind of looking holistically, what are the more broad patterns of action that emerge from kind of the in-between spaces? And you may just have one or two, or you may be like, I'm still not sure, but just kind of think about that and jot down some notes. Again, there doesn't have to be clarity just yet, but where are you kind of seeing patterns across and in between these spaces? Again, things that if you were to do those, you would recognize that you're closer to your sweet spot. Let's take a minute to do that. So I know this can be a little tougher, this pattern spotting. So it's okay if you're not clear yet. We're just, again, trying to get some data from our own thoughts that can help us move into writing a change narrative, writing a draft of our change narrative.
Okay, so you have your worksheet, I hope, whether you're writing on paper or you're writing on the worksheet. Think about that, the map that was on just the prior screen, as a guide. So I don't know if you can see mine, but this is how I just scribbled it out. I traced a coffee cup to make the 3 circles, and then I just kind of scribbled in there. And I'm probably going to end up doing this again, who knows how many times. So it can be what you need it to be right now. It doesn't have to be publishable. So keep that in mind, but we're going to give you 10 minutes or so to take that sort of map and create an actual change narrative statement in the next about 10 minutes or so. So it's a simple description that shapes your patterns of discourse and action to move you toward the life patterns that you desire. It can be a vision statement. You can write a paragraph. You can write a story, a poem. You can draw. However you want to express this. We want you to leave here today with something that you can kind of hold on to and come back to and, you know, revise as it fits for you. So we're going to give about 10 minutes to do that. And I will share mine as an example while you're thinking. I advance equitable community because I align my activities with my goals, connecting in contribution and with compassion. I learn continually as I create patterns of action that manifest my purpose. And that little caterpillar is a black swallowtail caterpillar, and he's been my mascot this semester. So.
And I'll share mine too. It's a little bit longer, but keep in mind, I actually did this through like a 2-day workshop, and I've had some time to reflect on it. So just know I've spent a little more time on mine, and I'm still refining it though. But essentially, I said, I am a purposeful and productive scholar practitioner because I am clear in my agenda, organized in my systems, and action-oriented. I connect with my students and colleagues with curiosity, collaboration, and courage to think, act, and write on our edge. I learn continually and create patterns of praxis that manifest change in individuals, groups, and communities, and I communicate that change through forms of scholarship. So again, write without fear right now. Just what's coming up for you from these guides, and just put words on the paper, any words, and we'll come back together. I'm just going to hold us about 7 minutes because I want to make sure we can get through the rest of our time together and have some time to share. So I'll put the timer up and we'll come back together then. So again, quick writing, whatever's on your mind, use those statements to create that narrative. Just doing a quick check-in. Could we use another minute or two? Okay, let's take 2 more minutes then. Okay, let's move into our next step. Chances are that was not enough time to write your full narrative, but it's, again, we're just starting to get the words on the page. And at this point, we're going to actually share our stories or begin to share the pieces of our story as they're evolving. So this is where some of that vulnerability, Cheryl, that you mentioned is required to just read or share in whatever way you would like to a bit about the complex narrative that you just described. So we're going to get into pairs for 10 minutes, about 5 minutes for each person. And so what I would invite you to do is take about 3 minutes to share what is the pattern, what is that sweet spot that you're aspiring to, or the thing that you want to change, and then go ahead and read or describe your complex narrative. Your partner will listen until you're finished, and our goal is not to interrupt, but to just listen, and then to ask questions. So within that 5 minutes after you shared, to ask questions about that narrative. So we really want to encourage you to keep those questions open-ended. And our goal is not necessarily to provide advice, but how can we use questions to help our partner think deeper about their own narrative, and then we'll switch. Okay, so I have us broken up into rooms, into pairs, and one room may have a group of 3. So I'll have to you'll have to adjust your time just slightly. And it's set for 9 minutes, plus there's a 60-second countdown, so you can adjust the time accordingly. So again, here's our chance to just share with one another a bit more about our change narrative. I'm going to stop the recording. Oh, nope, cancel. I'm going to pause. Welcome back. Nicola, do you want to pick us back up?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing in your group. So how did that make you feel as you shared and as you listened to others? What stuck out to you? You can feel free to unmute, or if you'd rather drop it in the chat as well, that's fine.
There are some similarities just with everything that we were sharing, and how kind of we both connected on similar aspects.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. I think in my group too, there was some connection on just like, this feels like a really big thing, and it's okay to not have all the answers right now. It's okay that this feels iterative and that you redo it or tear it up and start over. Whatever feels right, you're making progress just by doing the work. So would anybody else like to share?
Yeah, just like, what was this like? What insights did you take away from the process? Maybe there's a really good question someone asked you that would benefit the whole group. Yeah, Innocent, you want to share one? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Priest, Michaela, and all of you online with us. Actually, it was great. Yeah, it was great. This is my first impression, because being in a kind of safe place, like being in a small group and interacting, it was a nice connection, and also knowing others. But what I feel right now is a kind of level of accountability and trust, because if we don't trust in you, we will not share some of our private life with you. So being on this platform in just a couple of minutes and fail days is something, yeah, extremely interesting and grateful. I'm grateful to all of you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, well, as we begin to form this narrative, we're surfacing kind of the patterns that we want to see in our lives. It gives us a vision for where we want to be. The question is then, what are the kind of daily actions that get us there? How do we translate our values into action? What are the commitments we need to make and put into practice to do this? And we're going to use another tool. We're going to add a tool to our narrative that will help with this. And it's a tool that within complex systems is called simple rules. It's a way, but you can just think of them as like commitments, or again, actions values and practice. They are a few general, positive, active phrases that describe, again, the behaviors that you want to demonstrate. And the reason I have a flock of birds up here is actually computer modeling has shown that birds follow really interesting patterns, right? Like we see them like moving through the sky in flocking patterns. There's just this beautiful, elegant coherence to them in the midst of what feels like chaos. Like they're just coherent. But really what these models show us is that birds fly following simple rules. And the simple rules are, more or less, flying towards the center, matching your speed of your neighbor, don't run into anyone. And then there's a fourth one too, like watch out for predators, right? And that there's this, if everyone does this, every bird does this, it creates, right, that coherent pattern. And so how does that apply to us? Like if we think about individually, and we can also think about this with our teams and our communities, right? Like how do we create that kind of coherence to create the patterns that we want to see? And so we create our own simple rules. We're going to invite you today to just think of like 2 to 4 statements that might help you live out and move forward in that narrative. Mikola, do you want to share a few of the statements that you came up with as you were thinking about yours?
Sure. I have 4. Share and learn in every interaction. Say no with courage. Honor my own energy and competing responsibilities. Do no harm to myself or to others.
Awesome. And I have a hard time narrowing them down to 4, but here's a couple that are on my list. This is still, again, part of my challenge is focus, and it's because I kind of overthink things. So I'm working on that. But I wrote down write every day. This is hard for me, but I think if I can follow that, it would help me. Keep learning and trust myself and follow through. I guess that was 3 I just shared. So we invite you to take a few minutes now and just think, what's 2 to 4 simple rules that apply to your change narrative, that if you live them out, you're moving in the direction of that narrative. Yes, innocent. I'm sure there's no shortage of articles that you can read every day and books. Yeah.
So we have two simple rules that have been shared so far in the chat, and we would invite if you would like to share yours in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and share just one of yours, that would be great. Megan, I like that brick by brick analogy a lot. Thank you for sharing that.
Cynthia, I wonder how you could frame that in a more positive statement, right? Because you said like get rid of perfectionism and negativity, but what's the thing that actually replaces that? And maybe others could help think through that. So right, because again, it's like what's the affirmative? Like if you did this, it would get rid of it. What about like live with something like work positively with an experimental mindset? That's not a great one. I'm sorry, I'm just not, my words aren't coming to me on Friday afternoon as freely, but does that make sense? Like I want to, show up with positivity and courage, right? Or something like that. Learn from every interaction. I think that's one way of when we worry about being perfect, like rather than saying like, don't fear failure. I think if we say like, I'm willing to learn from every interaction, that's a positive way of framing, of overcoming that. Yeah. Yeah. Acknowledging our limits and improving every day. Yeah, Cheryl, thanks. That was a more eloquent way of saying it. Be positive and accept imperfection. Yep, like that, yeah. Celebrate life. Great, yeah. Great. Yeah. Prioritize your tasks and have self-compassion and confidence. One of the things that I do, or I did, when I've worked on simple rules before is, these are actually simple rules originally that I created for working from home, and then I adapted them again for work. When the pandemic started and I was feeling like really overwhelmed, I used this tool to help just identify a few things, like focus on my circle of influence, ask for what I need, right? Related to that particular context. And I have it like a copy of this at home and in the office, and I just stick it on my wall and I look at them. So, think about how do you want to continue to develop and utilize these. I'm going to share my screen one last time. And Mikola has, I think, something to kind of bring us to conclusion here. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
So just as Dr. Priest just showed the way that she typed out her simple rules, we invite you to think about where you can take this next. How do you want to remind yourself of the work that you did today? Who do you want to tell the world about as your future self? As you're working toward this change, keep talking about that. What is for you the next wise action that you can take that moves you closer to that new person that you need to become for the reason that you shared? And I think just as we've talked about this whole workshop, really, the inquiry process is experimental. And because you're inquiring of yourself, which is something we don't really often, we're not taught as children to sort of do that and be introspective in these ways. So give yourself time in the next, even over the weekend, even early next week. There could be things that are surfacing that were brought up because of today. And we would just encourage you to be be open to that if there are insights that come, and see how they fit into the work that you started today.
And if you do want to spend a little more time with some of these ideas or dig a little deeper, we've included in the handout a reference list. Some of these concepts are coming from a particular training, but the book Simple Rules, A Radical Inquiry into Self is a great deep dive into this process. And then I've shared a few website links that also offer some additional tools and a little deeper reflection on these concepts. Thanks for sharing your afternoon with us. And I'll put my email in the chat. I guess I didn't do that, but and Nicola, I guess if you'd like to as well. And then if anyone would ever want to reach out and talk more about this or get a little more coaching around your change narrative, I know I'd be happy to visit with you.